Paul Doyle, you can remain seated throughout. You have pleaded guilty to and are to be sentenced by me today for a total of 31 offences. You entered those pleas on the second day of your trial, after the jury had been sworn, but before the prosecution had opened its case. I'll return to the timing of your pleas in due course, but first it's necessary to set out the facts of this case, the impact on your victims, and the principles that guide my approach to sentencing. Count 1 is an offence of dangerous driving, reflecting the entirety of the prolonged and shockingly bad driving that began shortly after you left your home on the afternoon of the 26th of May this year. Count 2 is an offence of affray, covering the wider fear and panic your conduct generated among the public that day. More significantly, counts 3 to 31 comprise a series of offences of causing or attempting to cause grievous bodily harm with intent to cause such harm, and unlawful wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, each relating to an individual victim injured or put at serious risk by your actions. Your pleas of guilty were entered at the latest possible stage and attract very limited credit. Nonetheless, they avoided the need for victims to give evidence, and they represent an acceptance of responsibility by you. The events of the 26th of May were meant to be a day of great civic pride for the people of Liverpool. The Liverpool Football Club had secured its 20th Premier League title, and tens of thousands of people, men and women, parents with prams and children perched on shoulders, filled the city centre to celebrate the victory parade. The parade concluded at the Liver building on the Strand at about 5:40 that afternoon, slightly later than planned. And as it ended and people began to make their way home, Water Street and Dale Street became densely crowded with pedestrians. Traffic management measures were in place to prevent vehicles from entering those areas, and you were aware of those measures because you had followed them earlier in the day. Anticipating the end of the parade, you drove your Ford Galaxy MPV, weighing nearly 2 tons, from your home in Croxteth towards the city centre in order to collect friends whom you had dropped off earlier. For no reason other than impatience and arrogance, your driving into the city was routinely dangerous. In poor weather conditions, you repeatedly undertook other vehicles at speed, you approached road hazards too quickly, and you drove through traffic lights at a busy junction when they were clearly showing red against you. You arrived at and entered Dale Street at 5:54 p.m. that afternoon, travelling against the flow of dispersing fans. From the outset, your driving was aggressive and dangerous. You frightened pedestrians, leaning on your horn and shouting required to filter right onto Exchange Street East. You decided not to do so. Instead, you made the conscious choice to drive past the cones and into the heart of the crowd. Between 5:59 and 6:01 p.m., a mere 2 minutes, you used your vehicle in a manner that turned it into a weapon, driving deliberately into and over more than 100 people on Dale Street and Water Street. You paused twice during this rampage. Each time you could have stopped, but you chose to continue, revving the engine and ignoring the screams and chaos around you. The footage is truly shocking. It is difficult, if not impossible, to convey in words alone the scene of devastation you caused. It shows you quite deliberately accelerating into groups of fans time and time again. You struck people head-on, knocked others onto the bonnet, drove over limbs, crushed prams, and forced those nearby to scatter in terror. You ploughed on, at speed and over a considerable distance, violently knocking people aside or simply driving over them, person after person after person. You accelerated forwards and backwards repeatedly. Several victims became trapped beneath the vehicle as you continued to move it. Others were thrown into the air or propelled across the ground. A number of witnesses, including serving police officers, describe you continuing to press the accelerator even when people were visibly underneath the car. You shouted expressions of frustration, or rather your shouted expressions of frustration underline your state of mind at the time. Not fear or panic, but an inexplicable and undiluted fury. Your vehicle only came to a halt on Water Street due to the heroic actions of a member of the public, Mr. Daniel Barr, who jumped into the back seat and shifted the automatic gear selector to the park position, combined with the sheer number of bodies trapped beneath the vehicle. Even then, witnesses, including those pinned under the car, heard you continuing to depress the accelerator, attempting to drive on. And your actions prevented, or rather his actions, Daniel Barr's actions, prevented further injury and may well have saved lives. It is almost impossible to comprehend how any right-thinking person could act as you did. To drive a vehicle into crowds of pedestrians with such persistence and disregard for human life defies ordinary understanding. This was not a terrorist attack, as some feared at the time, nor was it caused by any mechanical defect in the vehicle. You were not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and you were an experienced driver familiar with the car. You claimed in police interviews to have acted in panic and fear for your life due to the crowd's behaviour. That account was demonstrably false. The position should be stated clearly. That the crowd did not cause this incident. They reacted to it. Faced with a vehicle being driven directly at them, accelerating, reversing, and striking multiple people, they had no idea who you were, why you were driving in that manner, or whether this was a deliberate attack of an even more serious nature. Their responses, including shouting, striking the vehicle, and in some cases breaking windows, were the instinctive actions of frightened people trying to protect themselves and others, desperate to stop a moving threat that they could not understand. Those actions were not acts of aggression, they were acts of fear. That the chaos that unfolded was caused solely by your driving, and any attempt to place responsibility on the public or the Liverpool supporters present would be unfair and wholly unfounded. Your actions caused horror and devastation on a scale not previously encountered by this court. The indictment identifies 29 victims in counts 3 to 31, but that figure significantly understates the true extent of the harm. The prosecution quite properly limited the number of counts to ensure the case remained manageable for a jury. In reality, well over 100 people were struck or injured, many of them seriously, and the victim personal statements demonstrate that the impact extended far beyond those named on the indictment. That parents and children, police officers, grandparents, students, tourists, and passers-by were all caught up in the events which many believed in the moment to be a mass casualty terror attack. The physical injuries caused were wide-ranging and in many cases severe. They extended from complex life-changing harm, including multiple fractures, necrotizing infections, degloving type injuries, major soft tissue destruction and permanent disability, to dozens of cases of concussion, torn ligaments, significant bruising, and persistent mobility problems. Several victims were trapped beneath your vehicle. Others required lengthy hospital admissions, repeated surgical procedures, and months of assistance from family members or carers. For older and more vulnerable victims, the resulting loss of independence has been profound and enduring. The psychological harm was no less serious. Across the victim personal statements, there emerges a consistent pattern of trauma, nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks, hypervigilance, diminished confidence and withdrawal from day-to-day activities. Many victims now avoid crowds or busy roads and city centres. Some avoid even family gatherings. The police officers who attended the scene have been left with PTSD, intrusive memories and significant disruption to their working lives. Children have developed anxiety, nightmares, separation fears, and, in one case, an increase in epileptic seizures. What should have been a day of communal celebration has been instead left as a lasting legacy of fear, injury, and loss across this community. The overall harm is exceptional, not only in the sheer number of victims and the seriousness of their injuries, but also in the depth, duration, and human reach of the trauma you inflicted. Families were separated in the chaos. Parents were convinced their children had been killed. Children saw their parents unconscious or bleeding. And many people searched desperately for loved ones, not knowing whether they were alive. As Superintendent Earlham sets out in her business impact statement, your actions also had a significant impact on the wider city. A large, sterile crime scene had to be established, forcing businesses to close, disrupting transport and causing substantial financial loss. Some premises became makeshift triage centres. Staff were distressed and normal operations could not resume for days. The effects were felt far beyond the immediate victims. Following your arrest, you were interviewed under caution on a number of occasions. During those interviews, you failed to provide any credible or truthful explanation for your driving. The accounts you offered were inconsistent, implausible, and plainly contradicted by the objective evidence, including extensive CCTV and body-worn footage. In particular, your suggestions of confusion, loss of control, or momentary panic were demonstrably untrue. You did not accept responsibility for your actions, nor did you acknowledge the obvious risk you created or the harm you caused. You sought instead to minimise or deflect blame, and you showed no insight into the terror experienced by those you drove at and over. Although I can only do so in brief summary form, it is important that I refer individually to each of the victims named on the indictment. They can be assured that I have read with care all of the impact statements that have been provided. Looking at each count individually then, count 3, Jack Trotter was 22 at the time of the incident and was struck by your vehicle, suffering soft tissue injury to his left calf and a significant exacerbation of a pre-existing back condition. He describes ongoing pain, restricted movement, and significant psychological harm. Count 4, John Evans, was 47 and was hit and thrown onto the bonnet. He suffered pain to his right leg and reports psychological symptoms arising from the incident. Count 5, Scott Doyle, was 36 and sustained injuries to his right knee, lower back and right hand. He was unable to work for approximately 2 months and continues to experience flashbacks and psychological distress linked to the accident. Count 8, Helen Gilmore, was 51. She sustained a fractured left fibula, a sprained ankle, extensive soft tissue injuries and bruising to her elbow. She describes lasting pain, reduced mobility, and a persistent emotional impact on both herself and her family. And anxiety. Count 10, Jacqueline McLaren, was aged 60 and sustained a fractured left ankle. And since the incident, she has experienced disturbed sleep, recurrent flashbacks, and a persistent fear of crowded places, significantly affecting her daily life. Count 11, Anna Belonozenko was 43 and had, with her family, previously fled the war in Ukraine. She sustained a serious fracture to her left knee, requiring surgery involving plates and screws and a 9-day stay in hospital. She continues to suffer chronic pain, restricted mobility, and profound psychological trauma. Count 12, Jamie Fagan, was 26 and suffered injuries to his left arm, right elbow, and back. He describes persistent discomfort and intrusive memories replaying the events repeatedly in his mind. Traumatic stress disorder. Count 14, Carl Martin, was 24. He was struck by your vehicle and was on the ground behind it as you reversed towards his head. He managed to move out of the way but sustained cuts and grazes to his left leg, his left arm and right hand. Count 15, James Vernon, was 33. He was a paramedic responding to the emergency. He sustained grazes to both hands and his left knee, together with hip pain. He describes ongoing psychological symptoms, including disturbed sleep. Count 16, Simon Nash, 52, was thrown into the air, sustained a significant head laceration, 4 fractured ribs, and extensive abrasions. He was unable to work for months afterwards and describes lasting physical pain and psychological impact. Count 17, Teddy Everson, was aged only 6 months. He was in a pram at the time, which was struck during your driving. Remarkably, he did not sustain physical injury. Count 18, Cherie Aldridge, aged 36, suffered a severe degloving injury to her left thigh, requiring an 18-day stay in hospital and ongoing medical treatment. She feared she would die and describes prolonged pain, scarring, and being robbed of the maternity leave that she had anticipated. Count 19, Emily Wright, was 28. She sustained bruising to her foot and a soft tissue injury to her chest. She has since been diagnosed with PTSD and continues to relive the image of her son's pram being struck during the incident. As she says, the horror Count 22, Robin Dark, was 61 and suffered a deep wound to his heel requiring 10 stitches. The wound became infected, leading to 5 surgical procedures, 9 nights in hospital, 3 months in a wheelchair, and permanent scarring. He describes his retirement as having been utterly ruined. Count 23, Sam Alexander, was 31 and sustained a fractured ankle and multiple fractures to the midfoot, together with cuts and grazes. He describes ongoing pain, reduced mobility, and feelings of guilt that he could not protect his partner. Count 24, Hannah O'Neill, aged 30, sustained a fractured ankle which continues to affect her mobility. She describes a profound loss of confidence and emotional distress, with her wedding plans being postponed as a result. Count 25, Stefan Detlaf, was 73 and suffered 4 broken ribs, together with cuts and bruising, and required an inpatient admission to hospital for 5 days. He describes continuing psychological symptoms affecting both himself and his family. Count 26, Christine Zieks, was 66 and sustained 6 broken ribs, a hemothorax, subcutaneous emphysema, fractures to her fingers, and a wrist fracture, and she was in hospital for 4 days. Count 27, David Price, was 44 and suffered a laceration above his right eye, a swollen cheek and black eye, together with back pain and cuts to his knees. He experienced shock and distress after being struck by the car. Count 28, Susan Pacey, was aged 77. She was one of those who were recovered from underneath the vehicle. She is fortunate not to have been killed. She sustained multiple fractures, including to her forearm, collarbone, pelvis, spine and ribs, together with a broken nose. Multiple bruises and grazes to many parts of her body and head, and she required surgery and spent 27 days in hospital. And she continues to suffer severe physical limitations and psychological distress. Count 29, Aaron Cothliff, was 17. He was found under the vehicle and sustained extensive abrasions, bruising to both legs, a sprained knee, shoulder bruising, and a small fracture to the tibia, complicated by infection. His mobility was affected for months, his education disrupted, and he describes significant psychological impact. Count 30, Ethan Gilland, was 17. He also was recovered from beneath the vehicle. He sustained a large area of gravel rash to his back, abrasions to his knee and ankle, and a soft tissue injury to his leg as a result of being struck. Count 31, James Weston, aged 40, was struck by the vehicle and suffered cuts and grazes together with pain to his hip, elbow and knee. In order properly to understand this case, it is important to recognise that the offences you have admitted were not the result of momentary recklessness or a panicked reaction. The truth, as captured on your own dashcam and multiple CCTV and mobile phone recordings, is that you lost your temper in a rage, determined to force your way through the crowd regardless of the consequences. By your pleas of guilty, you admit that you intended to cause serious harm to achieve that end, even to children. The task of determining the appropriate sentence in this case has been far from straightforward, not least due to the unprecedented nature of the incident and the sheer number of victims involved. Nonetheless, I am required to determine the seriousness of your offending, and in particular to assess your level of culpability and the nature of the harm you caused by reference to the relevant Sentencing Council guidelines for each type of offence. Also, although a large number of people were affected by your actions, I make it plain that you will be sentenced only in respect of the offences charged on this indictment. Turning to the guidelines for the offences of causing or attempting to cause grievous bodily harm and wounding with intent, it is common ground, and I have no doubt that this was Category A offending in terms of culpability. That conclusion is indicated by a combination of factors. Firstly, all of your victims were vulnerable because they were pedestrians of all ages and abilities, confronted by an oncoming vehicle travelling at speed while hemmed in by dense crowds. Secondly, you used your motor vehicle as a highly dangerous weapon, or at least as a weapon equivalent. When deliberately driven into a crowd of people, the car was capable of inflicting grave and fatal injuries, and that is precisely the risk you chose to create. And thirdly, there was an element of persistence in your actions. You had repeated opportunities to stop, but you chose instead to continue regardless. Some of your victims suffered injuries that fall within the highest level of harm, Category 1. That is because the impact resulted in permanent injury, including psychological condition, that has had a substantial and long-term effect on their ability to carry out their normal day-to-day activities. Examples of this level of harm are to be found in Count 28, Susan Pacey, and Count 22, Robin Drake. Others suffered injuries falling just short of this level of harm. The starting point for a single Category 1A offence is 12 years custody, with a range up to 16 years. The starting point for a single Category A2 offence is 7 years custody. Of course, I am not concerned here only with a single offence. There are a number of aggravating factors not already taken into account. You have a number of previous convictions. You are now aged 54. Between the ages of 18 and 22, you accumulated a number of convictions, including for offences of violence, one of which resulted in a sentence of 12 months imprisonment. Those convictions were interwoven with your short period of military service, from which you were discharged on the basis that your services were no longer required. Although you are not a man of previous good character, and perhaps have always had issues with your temper, you have not, though, committed any other offence for many years, and I do not increase your sentence, therefore, because of this antecedent history. The offences were committed during a major public celebration in the city of Liverpool, transforming an occasion of collective enjoyment into one of fear and disruption, and causing significant and lasting harm to the life and reputation of the city. That is a further aggravating factor. Also, there was adverse impact on city centre businesses, and the offences were committed in the presence of children, and some of the victims were very young and others were elderly. There are, of course, other important factors that I must have regard to, factors which reflect personal mitigation. As I have observed, after a troubling start to your adult life, you did turn your life around. You went to university and have had a successful career within the cyber security industry, and you are married with 2 sons. I have read a substantial number of character references written by family members, friends, colleagues, and professional associates. They come from people who have known you over many years and in different settings, including your wife, your close family, former colleagues in the technology sector, neighbours, and community contacts. Collectively, those references describe you as a devoted husband and father, a reliable and supportive family member, and a person who has lived a disciplined and responsible life for many years. You are consistently described as hard-working, kind, generous with your time, and willing to help others. Several referees speak of your professional success, your mentorship of younger colleagues, and your involvement in community and sporting activities with children. These people are as bewildered as everyone else at the shocking events of the 26th of May, describing it as wholly out of character. They also refer to your expressions of regret. I accept all of that, and I recognise that the sentence I am bound to pass will have a devastating and profound impact on you, and more importantly on your wife and children. But I am afraid that this evidence of positive good character can have only limited effect on the sentence when the court is dealing with offences of this gravity. In my judgment, the presence of multiple high culpability factors, the balance of aggravating and mitigating factors, and the sheer scale of the offending justifies a sentence very significantly above the relevant category range for an A1 offence. You are also entitled to some reduction in your sentence to reflect your guilty pleas. I appreciate that this will have been a difficult decision, and the circumstances in which you have been detained have not made legal conferences straightforward. But the evidence against you on many, if not all, of the charges was overwhelming, and you could have given an indication of acceptance of responsibility much earlier than you did. The relevant guideline provides that where, as here, guilty pleas are entered at the commencement of the trial, the reduction should be no more than 10%. I am not persuaded that you should receive greater credit than that. Because many of these offences are specified offences, I am required to consider the issue of dangerousness. That is, whether there is a significant risk of you committing further specified offences, and, if so, whether there is a significant risk of you causing serious harm as a result. Given the highly unusual circumstances of this case, your general character, and your lack of previous convictions for similar behaviour, I am not satisfied that you do present such a risk. The further matter which requires to be considered in this case is the issue of totality. In a case such as this, I cannot simply take a figure for one offence and multiply it by a factor of 29. A proper balance must be struck between the acknowledgement of your multiple and very serious offending and the imposition of a just and proportionate sentence. I take all of the Section 18 offences as the lead offences, and all sentences will run concurrently. The total sentence will reflect your offending in respect of all associated offences on the indictment. In the circumstances, the total sentence which I impose upon you is one of 21 years and 6 months imprisonment. It would have been 24 years after trial. This will comprise sentences of 21 years and 6 months on each of the 12 Section 18 grievous bodily harm and wounding offences, sentences of 16 years on each of the attempted Section 18 offences, and sentences of 20 months on each of the offences of affray and dangerous driving. As I have said, each of those sentences will run concurrently, making a total sentence of 21 years and 6 months. You will serve 2/3 of that sentence in custody before you are released on licence. If you fail to abide by the conditions of your licence, you can be returned to serve some or all of the remainder of that sentence. For the offence of dangerous driving, you will also be disqualified from holding or obtaining a licence to drive, and you will be disqualified until you have passed an extended retest. Many people will think that you should never be allowed to drive again, but I must also consider your prospects for rehabilitation. I intend to impose a disqualification from driving that will operate for a further 3 years after your eventual release. The total period of the disqualification from today's date that comprises a combination of extension and uplift to reflect the term in custody you will serve. To spell this out, the period of discretionary disqualification is 3 years, plus 10 months extension representing half of the custodial term for the offence of dangerous driving, plus 13 years and 6 months uplift to reflect the sentences imposed on the other offences. Because the disqualification cannot be backdated to the date you went into custody, I consider it right to reduce the discretionary period by 6 months to take account of the approximate time you have already spent in custody. The total disqualification from today's date will therefore be 16 years and 10 months. This is not intended to be a mathematical calculation, but it should ensure that upon your release you will be subject to disqualification for a period of around 3 years. Mr. Doyle, you may now go with the officers.
talk around the paramedic, did you? And I sent an email saying there's all of this stuff and it's showing the one that knows. 5 minutes ago.
Will that go any higher? Looks a bit bent, like leaning. That's just the way that I've placed it. You're very welcome. Sorry I couldn't get up as soon then.
Thank you.
What's that? Oh, grid line okay, a bit closer? Not for me, obviously. But here, just let you there, yeah? Right up to the mics, okay. Right.
Is that right here?
We'll give you a 10, how much warning do you want? A couple of minutes, or
Yeah.
It'll be Detective Chief Inspector John Fitzgerald. Yeah.
Again?
Not Patrick.
Not Patrick, no.
Whoever Patrick is, the lead investigator, and then
Yeah.
it'll be the CPS as well this weekend.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the same two at the press briefing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
It's Detective Chief Inspector John Fitzgerald, who's the SI over the case, and then it's the CPS. Did Michelle give a time?
Just 2-minute warning.
Is it a 2-minute warning now?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm alright. I'm sharing it.
Thank you.
Yes, I am. Sorry, I'm just checking.
That's you.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Allison from Crown Prosecution Service. I'm the lead prosecutor on the case of Mr. Doyle. As you'll be aware, on the 26th of May 2025, Paul Doyle drove a car that weighed almost 2 tonnes into crowds of people celebrating Liverpool Football Club having won the Premier League. In 7 minutes of dangerous driving, Paul Doyle, a middle-aged family man, used that vehicle as a weapon, hitting more than 100 people, including children, babies and the elderly. When it eventually ended, he had trapped some of those people under his car. He not only injured many people, he also generated horror and chaos on what was meant to be a day of celebration and joy for those attending the parade. The reason why he did it? The truth is as simple as it is awful. Paul Doyle lost his temper and in a rage drove into people, intending to cause them serious harm. The dash cam footage of his journey into Liverpool city centre is truly shocking. Before he got into the city, he was driving aggressively. Before he got to Dale Street, his driving was of a poor standard. He was undertaking other cars, going through red lights, nearly hit some pedestrians at a crossing. He did not even stop when he knew there were people under his car. He continued revving his engine to try and continue forward. You'll be aware of how many people he hit. Over 100 people were hit, over 100 people were struck by the car, and many of those were injured and caused serious harm. When his car finally did come to a stop because of the actions of those people under the car, but also the actions of one man, Daniel Barr, a man who can truly be described as a hero. We've all heard the judge commend Daniel Barr in his sentencing remarks. Mr. Barr got into the back of Paul Doyle's car. He did not know what he was facing when he got in, but he did know he had to stop that car. To do so, he put the controls of the automatic car into park and held it there, leant forward, pushing forward, holding that stick in place. It's because of his actions and a combination of those people trapped under the car that the car eventually came to a stop. There's no doubt that he prevented many more injuries, possibly even fatalities. I've got no doubt that Mr. Barr would continue to drive. The Crown Prosecution Service would like to thank Daniel Barr, like the judge did, for what he did on that day. When he got into Daniel Barr's car, he had no thought for his own safety. He just knew he had to do something to stop that car. The Crown Prosecution Service would also like to thank all the emergency services who responded that day, all those present who assisted those who were injured, the members of the public who assisted the police by providing invaluable pieces of evidence which helped build the case against Mr. Doyle. I'd also like to thank John and his investigation team and basically Merseyside Police generally for all the hard work they put in and providing me with and the prosecution team with the evidence which meant that the case resolved as it did. We had to watch an awful lot of CCTV, mobile phone footage, City Watch footage to build a strong case against the defendant, Mr. Doyle. In the end, Mr. Doyle had no choice but to plead guilty to all 31 charges that he faced. My thoughts and the thoughts of the CPS are with the victims and the witnesses today. They've been through a difficult 2 days, reflecting on a day in Liverpool on the 26th of May, which should have been a day of joy and celebration, but turned to horror in the space of 7 minutes. So I'll hand over to John.
Thanks, James. Paul Doyle is today starting a lengthy prison sentence as a consequence of his actions on the 26th of May this year. It is difficult to comprehend the devastating impact the events of that day have had and continue to have on so many people. On what should have been a day of celebration for the city, Doyle chose to act in an aggressive and dangerous manner with no regard for the safety and well-being of other people. No prison sentence will be able to undo his actions on that day or heal those who continue to suffer physically and psychologically as a result of what they endured. Our thoughts remain with everyone affected, and I hope that now the judicial process is finished, those people will be able to start moving on and rebuild their lives. I hope that this prison sentence will also give Doyle the chance to reflect on his actions and the impact that he has had. This has been one of the most extensive investigations in the history of Merseyside Police. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the investigation team for their hard work and diligence. Over the past 7 months, we have supported 134 victims, spoken to more than 1,500 witnesses, viewed nearly 280 pieces of footage, and gathered over 700 statements. I'd also like to thank those who bravely came to the assistance of those injured and impacted on the day, including Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, the North West and St John's Ambulance Services, His Majesty's Coast Guard and our policing colleagues. And I'd also highlight what has already been mentioned in the exceptional bravery of Daniel Barr. Finally, I'd like to thank our colleagues at the Crown Prosecution Service who worked alongside us to build a case so strong that Doyle had no choice but to plead guilty to all the charges that he faced. Thank you.
We'll just do here. We'll just
Right in front today?
Yeah.
Michelle? Yes. Ready, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, so Merseyside Police will come
have you not?
have just released just a statement, our statement about the sentencing of Paul Doyle, who got 22 years and 6 months for multiple charges concerning the Liverpool Parade. So here you can see the TV camera crews from around the world. You'll be reading this in the newspapers tomorrow. You'll see it online. You'll see it on the news later on this evening. Good Morning Britain tomorrow. And yeah, there was a bit of a media frenzy, but it can't be underestimated that the victims are still suffering a lot. So I hear people saying that there's no one killed, but there's a lot of victims who are still suffering a lot of trauma over what happened on that very day. And they've got some still life-threatening injuries. So it's Don Newville here at the sentencing at Liverpool Town Court of Paul Doyle, who's been sentenced 22 years and 6 months, and from Liverpool Town Court. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you so much.
You talk so well, don't you?
Yeah, just flows, yeah. With no script and stuff. It's not easy, but I had media training and stuff.
Oh, right, lad.
Yeah, so I did that. You know what I mean?
Is that actually with your mind reading as well, does it?
Kind of, yeah. But it's not, you know, a lot of people have scripts and all that, and I had to just do it.
Yeah.
Is that all right? Thank you. And you've got my card. You'll follow me on Instagram and stuff. Yeah, so there's me Instagram, City Don Magic. You've got a YouTube channel? I'm on YouTube and I'm on Google. If you type my name in Google, it's the first search what comes up. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to meet you lads. Yeah. And I really appreciate it. Was that good?
Yeah, very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care. Yeah, you too, mate. What's your name? Ray. Ray. I'll look out for you. Send me a link to your YouTube channel. All right. All right, mate. Thank you. Yeah, you too. I love you. Yeah.